welcome back to another video. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Anthony and I've mostly been documenting my ongoing F10 build, but I wanted to take a small break from that in order to make today's video where I'll go over the different F10 models that came to North America in case you're considering buying one yourself. Now, there's a ton of different videos about each model individually, but I wasn't really able to find any solid videos that talked about all of them together. So I wanted to create this video where I'll compare the different models, the engine and transmission specs, and most importantly, the common issues with each model in case you're considering picking up an F10. My goal with this video is to hopefully create a one-stop shop for anyone who's considering purchasing an F10, or at the very least, if you're looking for an easy place to compare all the different F10 models that came to North America, hopefully this video will do just that. And by the end, you'll definitely have a better understanding of all the different F10 models and the common issues that each one had. So with that, let's hop into the video. Starting off the list, we have the F10 528i. This model was produced from 2012 to 2016. I did want to note real quick that there was a 528i in 2011 that came with the N52 inline 6 motor. So just be aware that if you are looking for a 528i and it's a 2011, it's possible that the car will come with an inline 6 non-turbo motor. But from 2012 to 2016, the F10 came with the N20 B20 4-cylinder turbo motor. The engine made 241 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. The transmission options were only an 8-speed ZF auto, and you could option either for a rear-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive. Some of the common issues that the 528 F10 had are the timing chain, which BMW extended the warranty for this issue to 7 years or 70,000 miles from the vehicle's in-service date. And if you're considering purchasing an F10 528, I'd strongly advise trying to find one that's at least 2015 and newer, because BMW changed the design of the part and the timing chain issue was much less prevalent in those models. Other common issues include the valve cover and the valve cover gasket leaking. This is because this motor has a plastic valve cover, and after just years of constant heat cycling, they're prone to cracks and eventually leaking. And another common issue is the oil filter housing gasket leak. Now, I'm unsure if these motors are prone to the similar problems that the 535 motor has in regards to the oil filter housing gasket leak. I know on those motors, the 535 motors, that the oil filter housing gasket leak can cause major problems if not addressed soon, because the oil can leak down onto the serpentine belt and cause it to slip and fall off and get sucked into the crank seal. And so just another thing to look out for on these 528i models. Definitely do a little more digging, as this video isn't going to cover crazy in-depth of all the different issues and whatnot. It's just sort of an overview of all the different models. Alright, the next car on the list is the F10 535. This car was produced from 2011 to 2017. This model came with the N55 B30 motor that made 302 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. The transmission options were an 8-speed ZF auto or a 6-speed manual, but I want to note that the 6-speed manual option was only available from 2011 to 2014. This model was also available in rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, but again, I want to note that if you are considering an all-wheel drive version of this car, that there is not a 6-speed manual option for those. They only come in the 8-speed ZF auto. Some common issues are, again, the valve cover and the valve cover gasket leaks. This motor also comes with a plastic valve cover gasket that, again, is prone to cracking with consistent heat cycling over time. Another common issue is the oil filter housing gasket, which I briefly mentioned in the last model we went over, but again, this is a pretty major one. If you're considering purchasing a 535, you want to make sure that this has either been handled or you are constantly checking to see if there's a leak coming from this spot, because again, if it leaks bad enough, it can saturate the drive belt and eventually cause it to slip off and potentially get sucked into the crank seal, or sucked in through the crank seal. And if that happens, in extreme cases, the belt pieces that got sucked up can eventually work their way into the oil pan and eventually into the oil pickup and cause low oil pressure and engine failure. So this is a big one. Just make sure it's either been taken care of or been checked regularly and you stay on top of it. Another common issue for this model is a water pump failure. Now again, just something to look out for, see if it's been done in the past. They are kind of tricky to replace if need be. They are underneath the intake manifold, I believe. If not, at least at the bottom of the motor, you got to get underneath the car. And if you aren't able to get underneath the car, you're definitely going to be paying quite a bit more money to have it done at a shop. And another common issue is the Vanos solenoid failure. This kind of goes hand in hand with just making sure that you are staying on top of your oil changes and making sure that the oil doesn't get too gunked up from going too long. Things to look out for when a potential Vanos solenoid is on its way out is just excessive engine ticking. If when you do oil changes the oil is pretty dark and black, that could be not signs of a Vanos solenoid failure, but that can lead to Vanos solenoid failure, so just be careful of that. And another common issue is the high pressure fuel pumps. These are known to go out pretty frequently on the turbo cars, not just an F10 thing. I've heard of these going out on the 335s, the E90, E92, E93. It's a common thing across quite a few of the BMW platforms, so again, just be on the lookout for that. Next, we have the F10 550i. This model is arguably the most problematic of all of them that are available. They were produced from 2011 to 2013 for the pre-LCI models and 2014 to 2017 for the LCI models. This car came with the N63 B44 engine that made 402 horsepower and 443 pound-feet of torque, and the LCI model made 444 horsepower and the same 443 pound-feet of torque. Now this one you can option for the 8-speed ZF Auto or the 6-speed manual. The 6-speed manual was only available on this platform for 2011 through 2013 models, and again, you can option this car with rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. But again, I want to note that if you get an all-wheel drive model, this 6-speed manual option is not available. Now, some of the common issues for this platform are the oil consumption problems. This motor is considered a hot V8 because the turbos are located in the valley between the two heads, and so it gets really hot and oil is consumed pretty fast on these motors. You want to be careful and make sure you're always topped off. It's advised to keep a cord on you and to top it off every 600 to 1,000 miles. Another common failure for this car is the fuel injector failures. There's no really telling when these are going to go out. I've heard of them going out on cars as low as 20,000 miles and lasting up to 100,000 miles. Just check the history and make sure that they've either been replaced, and if they have not, consider replacing them. They're pretty pricey, but you definitely don't want to blow a motor because one of the fuel injectors went out in one cylinder. Now, another common issue is the timing chain failure. BMW did offer a customer care package where they would check the timing chains every visit, and if there was a problem, cover part or all of the repair. I'd heavily advise checking for this if you're considering purchasing one of these models, as a timing chain failure on one of these V8 twin turbo motors could cost quite a bit of money. Another common problem on these motors are leaking valve stem seals. If you're noticing oil coming from your tailpipes at any point, it's possible that these seals have gone bad. Just be on the lookout for that in the history if you're considering purchasing one. And another common issue is that the batteries can drain really fast on these cars. I read that the reason this can happen is because BMW designed these cars to charge the battery off of coasting, not so much off of the belt-driven alternator, in hopes of creating better fuel economy by not putting so much load on the engine. With that comes draining the battery really fast, because not a lot of people with these cars coast. They just kind of drive them hard and fast. And so on top of that, there's a lot of little features that this car has, like the keyless entry and a lot of modules that stay active after you're out of the car. And so it's recommended by BMW that you consider replacing this battery every other oil change visit, which is definitely a lot, and again, why the 550 is considered one of the most problematic models available. The next model we're going to go over is the ActiveHybrid 5 F10. This is the hybrid model. They were produced from 2011 to 2016. They came with the N55 B30 motor that produced 335 horsepower and 332 pound-feet of torque. This model has the same exact engine as the 535 model. They were only available in an 8-speed ZF Auto, and they also only came in a rear-wheel drive configuration. The common issues are essentially the same as the 535, so I won't really go over them again. But I will note that because this car is a hybrid and some of these cars are over a decade old at this point, it's worth mentioning that if you're considering purchasing one of these ActiveHybrid 5 F10s, to see if anything has been worked on in regards to the hybrid motor. Maybe it's been replaced, maybe it's had work done, maybe it hasn't. and that's just something worth considering when looking at one of these cars. I couldn't find any specific info on how long one of these motors should last or how long the battery should last, but considering it's a BMW hybrid, it'll probably be pretty pricey if something does happen to it, so just take that into consideration if you're looking into buying one of these ActiveHybrid 5 F10s. Now last but not least, we have the F10 M5. They were produced from 2012 to 2016. The 2012 to 2013 models were the pre-LCI models, and the 2014 to 2016 were the LCI. They also introduced the M5 Competition in 2014, and those went to 2016 as well. The M5 came with the S63 B44 that produced 553 horsepower and 502 pound-feet of torque, and when the LCI model was introduced, it made 591 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque. Now this car was available in the 7-speed DCT or dual clutch transmission or a 6-speed manual, but I want to note that the 6-speed manual was only offered in the United States, so if you're outside of the United States, it's likely that you won't find one available, and these cars were only available in rear-wheel drive, at least here in North America. Now, the common issues on the F10 M5 are not nearly as bad on this motor as they are on the N63 B44 motor. The common issues on the S63 are Vanos solenoid failure. Again, this motor is considered a hot V8, which means the turbos are in between the heads of the motor, and so it tends to get really hot and burn a little more oil, and with that comes making sure that the engine is constantly topped off and you're doing oil changes regularly enough to not have a potential Vanos solenoid failure. Another common issue are the rod bearings. This isn't very surprising because the motors of this generation, not just referring to the M5, but the E9X generation, the E46 generation, and the E60 M5 V10 cars all came with rod bearing issues, so it's no surprise that this car has the occasional rod bearing issue. It's much less common on the S63 motor than the other cars I just mentioned, but again, just be on the lookout, make sure you're topping off oil and making sure you're doing regular oil changes. Another common issue kind of goes hand in hand with the first two that I just mentioned is the oil consumption. Again, being a hot V8, you are going to burn a little more oil than you normally would in another car. So just make sure you keep oil on hand. You're constantly topping off when the car says you're running low, and just be on top of your regular oil changes. And the last common issue that I found for these cars are spark plugs and ignition coils going out. They aren't nearly as common, but they are advised to be replaced every 30 to 60,000 miles. Spark plugs and ignition coils are pretty easy maintenance items if you can handle DIYing them yourself. They are pricey on these cars. The ignition coils are pretty expensive. Spark plugs not so much, but if you're gonna do one, you might as well do the other. Other than that, these engines are pretty robust. They are fun to drive, and the fact that you can get them in a 6-speed manual is definitely a plus. Alright, so that about does it for the brief overview of each F10 model that's available in North America. I definitely could have gone way deeper, but I just wanted to cover sort of the surface level of each model in case you were considering purchasing one and you just wanted to get a quick idea for all the differences between the ones available. Now, as for myself, I landed on purchasing a 535. It's kind of the perfect in-between. There's not a lot of issues with this model as the 550 has, and it's not as expensive, of course, as the 550 or the M5. So for me, it made sense. It's still a turbo motor, which was a plus for me. I haven't had a turbo motor up to this point, and so being able to do all the full bolt-on mods and have it be able to make pretty good power compared to potentially if I had went with the 528 model, I figured it was a good compromise between price and potential mod capabilities. And so anyways, hopefully if you made it this far in the video, you at the very least learned a little bit about all the different models that are available in the United States, and hopefully this video can be a guide for anyone who's just interested in learning in the different F10 models, or if you're considering purchasing one, you at the very least have a better idea of some of the things to look out for when you go and look at one for yourself. So with that, I'm gonna wrap it up. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Please leave a comment if I left anything out about any specific model. I'd love to hear about if you own one already, some of the problems you've had to deal with, or some of the things that people should look out for that maybe I didn't mention. I could definitely pin a comment if you guys decide to post anything down there. Leave a thumbs up if you're into that stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.